Thank you for attending our webinar today on the American government before independence. My name is Paul. I'm one of the instructors here at Penn Foster High School. Just want to go over a couple of items about our resources here at Penn Foster High School, including how students can contact us by phone at 1-888-427-1000, as well as by texting the word LEARN to 39033. As well as a number of options from our help and support page, including email, chat, as well as being able to set up an appointment for someone from our educational department to give you a call. And as you know, we also have our webinar schedule and live help sessions available on your message center, as well as in our Google document available to students. So a lot of different ways of getting in contact with us. Our webinar today will be covering looking at our representative democracy, as well as the English Parliament, and then the early types of colonies, as well as the colonial governments. So first, we'll talk about some of the major points of representative democracy, as well as English government, and it all very much starts with the Magna Carta. If you already viewed or attended the first part of the civics lesson, you know that England was part of as an absolute monarchy, in which the king and queen really ruled the society and made the ultimate decisions on most policies. And at the time of King John, he was able to have his barons and his nobles and his upper class really control the citizens within their societies or within their areas of the English Empire, and that alliance between the king and his nobles really started fraying when the king demanded not only higher taxes from the citizens, the people, but also from the nobles. And the nobles and the barons end up raising an army against King John. And when their armies met in 1066, they established what's called the Great Charter, or the Magna Carta, in which they agreed, or the king was forced to agree, to give more rights to the noble class, including being able to have a jury of their peers, so it's not only up to the king to rule whether or not someone is guilty or not, and also a greater respect for the rule of law, that the king himself must respect the rule of law. If he breaks the rules, he is then subject to that same jury of his peers, as well as society. The charter itself did limit the king's power, but did not give powers and new rights to English citizens until much later. At this point with the Magna Carta, it's only about the expansion of rights of the noble class. And this leads us to our first poll question. And that question is, whose rights were expanded initially from the Magna Carta? Was it the king, nobles, English citizens, or Parliament? Who gained greater authority or greater rights after the Magna Carta? Give you guys about 5 more seconds. Okay, thank you so much. So the answer would have been that it was a noble class that gained more rights after the Magna Carta. As you can see, that the king really loses rights, loses a greater authority in England, and the rights of most citizens did not grow, did not expand until much later in English history, when the rights of the rule of law, as well as the jury of peers, really does not reach the rest of the English citizen for several centuries. As always, if you do have questions as we go along, please feel free to let me know. The next big moment, or the next big progression in English history and English government history, came with the growing of the English Parliament. There was a King's Council in the Middle Ages in which the king was able to ask for support from, mainly it was a noble class, so the barons and the nobles that were part of the Magna Carta now had more advisory authority with the king. King Edward did eventually expand the rights of the council, made them a bit more of a representative government, representative society, and the rights were actually created based on law with the confirmation of charters, which essentially gave the Parliament the right to tax the citizens of England. It was within the confirmation of charters, it spoke of the power of the tax given to the whole realm, which meant Parliament. So the Parliament, as a representative of the English people, were the ones who were able to raise taxes. It did establish itself as a bicameral legislature, in which the House of Lords was the higher authority and a court system, or the highest court in the land for England, and then the House of Commons was the house in which was elected by English citizens, and were the ones who primarily were the legislature and were the ones who passed laws for England. Here's a more recent picture of the House of Commons. As you see, very similar to what we have in the House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate here in the United States, in which citizens or in which the members, the representatives, are sitting across from each other from different political parties and are able to speak and discuss issues that are coming up for laws or as bills. The next major movement for the English Parliament was out of the Glorious Revolution, in which King James was king of England, was deposed from the Glorious Revolution by William and Mary of the Netherlands, who established essentially a constitutional monarchy, which we talked about a little bit in the last section of origins of American government, in which more power is given to the Parliament rather than the King and Queen. The Glorious Revolution also established an English Bill of Rights, which allowed for greater rights from the Magna Carta, as well as more rights for citizens of England to be able to have freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, the different laws or the different rights that we now know as sort of commonplace, considered commonplace for all English citizens as well as even American citizens. And we established sort of what's called the Westminster model, which takes both the House of Lords and the House of Commons, sets that up as the policy that is based on that bicameral legislature that I mentioned before. And that leads us to our next poll question. What gave the Parliament the power to tax? Was it the King's Council, the confirmation of charters, or the Glorious Revolution? What gave Parliament the power to tax? Give 5 more seconds. Okay, thank you. So was the confirmation of charters that gave the power to tax to the whole realm, which would become known as Parliament, around England or in England. So as England becomes more free and gain more rights for its citizens, more and more of them are using those rights as they go into the New World, into the new English colonies in the Americas, in the New World. And we really see from the beginning of early colonists, particularly in England, as what we now know as America as the land of immigrants. That at the time, most were English speaking, believed in personal liberty, a respect for human rights, as well as government responsibilities. So the same rights that were talked about in England, believed in by the Glorious Revolution, promoted by Parliament, English citizens would be coming to the colonies with those same type of rights, same types of ideas of what kind of responsibilities or what kind of rules should govern the new colonies. And these same rights are what we become very accustomed to as the American Revolution starts kind of building, as less and less English colonists believe that the British government is respecting the personal liberties, the human rights, and even not being a responsible government, that we do lead to the American Revolution. And let's take a couple of moments to look at the early colonists, starting with the colony of Jamestown, which began as a corporate charter that really most of the colonists came for economic opportunity, looking for greater wealth in the colonies, particularly in farming and looking for gold and looking for minerals to send back to England. We do start seeing a very common theme of dealings with Native Americans, and particularly in battling with them and warring with them, as well as dealing with new diseases. So between both the Native Americans and the new English colonists, we see the spreading of diseases that really dooms Jamestown from the beginning. But as Jamestown is able to expand its abilities, actually gain greater opportunities with particularly tobacco farming, we end up seeing the expansion of the first African slaves. That when the colonists tried to have their own, tried to use Native Americans as their slaves, they were not nearly as successful. They were not nearly as able to be slaves. That many Native Americans were dying from diseases, dying from the work. The English government decided to actually buy African slaves from the continent of Africa, send them to the new colonies, and use those on the plantations that are developed across Jamestown as the new cash crop of tobacco and other farm agriculture is able to be prosperous in Jamestown. This really builds up the ability of Virginia to become sort of the first major colony of the new British colonies, the new British Empire in the North America, and establishes the first representative democracy in the New World, with the House of Burgess being an elected group of legislators who make laws. Now, the difference is that the King of England and the Parliament establish a Privy Council, which is essentially the executive branch and essentially the ones who are the ultimate authorities in Virginia. The House of Burgess is able to approve laws, but it's up to the Privy Council to enforce them and to follow them. More information about the early colonies. The Quakers of Pennsylvania, founded by William Penn, who really believed in greater religious tolerance and the practice of the Quaker religion, which was in some ways more conservative than the majority in England, but also those who again preached tolerance, preached the idea that different religions could be part of the Pennsylvania colony, which allows the colony itself for most of its early history as the most diverse colony in the English in the 13 colonies of England. In other southern colonies, south of Jamestown and Virginia, more noble landowners are moving into these areas, like the Carolinas as well as Georgia. And we start seeing sort of the idea of the gentleman behaviors. The Southern gentleman is really created even from the beginning, that these noblemen bring to the English colonies their sense of behaviors and their sense of dignity. Now, of course, because of the plantations that they do buy in these colonies, also bring African slaves, and these large plantations become established on the backs of the new African slaves that these noblemen do bring from Africa. Some of the farther west colonial settlements are settled by the Scottish and the Irish who come to the British colonies. Many of them are significantly more poor than especially the noblemen of the southern colonies, but even the Quakers and the Virginians are far better off than the borderlanders who come primarily to settle farther west, are more interested in hunting, in setting up settlements, fur trade with the Native American populations. And then we see the colony of Maryland set up by the Lords of Baltimore from England as sort of a Catholic colony. And it's essentially a more failed colony, because as more Protestants move into Maryland, there is immediate conflict. That even though Lord Baltimore and John Calvert, who is one of the main governors of Maryland, they try to be tolerant. They try to allow for Catholics to practice their own way, have their own churches, but there is immediate conflict. There's immediate problems within the Maryland colony, which forces the English crown to really resettle that colony as less of a Catholic colony and more of a Protestant colony, and force the Catholics that are already in the colony to not be able to worship out in public, not able to have their own churches. The religious freedoms are really attacked in the new colony of Maryland. And then we move north to the Puritans in Plymouth, in which they famously move for religious freedom, and particularly and are really highlighted by their belief in education, trying to expand education for all the Puritans who move, all the Pilgrims that move into Plymouth Rock and to the Massachusetts Bay Colony. They establish the Mayflower Compact when they reach their new colony. They set themselves up as a self-rule charter. So in the reading material, they go over a lot of different charters. The Puritans do not come to America, the New World, with a colony yet. They were not given a right to one colonial area around the New World. So they set up their own charter. They say, this is going to be our charter. We're going to have a self-rule. We're going to allow for a majority vote for laws, for rules in the settlement. We're going to self-govern. We're not going to allow, like Virginia, we're not going to allow a privy council. They're not going to allow for the English crown to rule them. They want to have self-government. They want to be able to make their own decisions. And the shareholders of the Mayflower Compact and the Massachusetts Bay Colony were going to be the ones who are the primary decision makers, able to help the colonial governor make decisions. That does slightly change with the rule of John Winthrop as Massachusetts Bay Colony's governor. He calls to replace the shareholders for a legislative branch, and he does allow for a bit of expansion of rights to allow for Puritan men to vote for in legislative elections. So as opposed to only landowners, Winthrop did expand to all men within the Massachusetts Bay Colony. And this leads us to our final poll question. What was not part of the new Mayflower Compact? That it retained itself as a royal charter, that set majority rule, or that it allowed for self-governing by the colonists? Test. Okay, thank you. I think I figured out how to get this back working. Are there any questions on our webinar? Well, thank you all for attending. I will stay online for another 5 minutes or so, and you will receive this webinar recording tomorrow afternoon. Thank you so much.